Be sure to subscribe to the Healthcare Security Cast so you don't miss a single episode. We're on multiple platforms including Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and Audible, just about anywhere where you can listen to a podcast. For links to all of these sites, for links to join the Healthcare Security Cast community groups on LinkedIn and Facebook, or if you're interested in being a guest or being a sponsor, you can find all of this through one link. Check out our link tree at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. And before we get into the show, I just want to thank our sponsors, 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit 3dnetworktechnology.com. And Genetech, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetech, that's GENETEC.com. And also the Change Execution Group and 360 Life Transformations. Visit 360lifetransformations.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Tuesday, March the 9th. I'm joined today by Robert Casazza and Joe Sweeney. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Brian, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. No, I'm glad we were able to make the time. Now, I'm going to start off by asking the loaded question to each of you. And who is Robert Casazza and who is Joe Sweeney? Whoever wants to go first, feel free.
Age before beauty. So
Before beauty, I'll take that one. Okay. Well, first of all, nobody probably knows me as Robert. You know, in these parts, it's been shortened over time. I'm Bob Casazza. I'm most recently president of Metropolitan Healthcare Security Directors Association, which over time has been on and off the local chapter of IOS. We could probably get into that a little later on, but I'll give you an idea of where I came from and how I ended up where I am today. I had a 20 plus year career in the NYPD. I was a pretty active guy. I liked getting involved. And when I finished my career in 2007, I was the commanding officer of the homicide squad in Brooklyn, specifically Brooklyn South. So it was a great run. I loved every minute of it, and very busy time in the city's history and in the NYPD, particularly in the 80s and 90s. So I was a guy that liked to kind of get involved and muck around. Now, here we are in 2007. I had an offer to take a job in healthcare. I took a job in healthcare for what was then Lutheran Hospital, Lutheran Medical Center in Brooklyn. Very tough transition, and I'm guessing when Joe speaks to this, he'll agree. You know, one week you're rolling around with somebody, and a week and a half later you got this. You're looking for dentures or something else, and it's a very difficult transition into private industry. So I had a difficult time with that. Luckily, I got involved. I was kind of encouraged to network, and I think we can speak to that a little later. But we ended up networking. Ended up getting involved and introduced to this organization, Metropolitan MHSDA, and that sort of helped me make that transition and meet people like me who had certain commonalities, same problems, same type of issues. So I guess we could speak to that a little more as we move on.
Bob and I have similar backgrounds. I also was with the NYPD and very active, and we say that it's sort of like a differentiation between just working for the NYPD and those of us who were active kind of know we know each other when we see each other. You know what I mean? Like it's the same kind of spirit about the work we did, and so I was an active person too, and really enjoyed investigating. I was a detective, and my last 5 years were in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Just a great experience, and I loved the work. And when I retired, I went into private security, and at some point was offered the job at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. At the time, unlike Bob, I didn't really have that much experience in management. Certainly not, managing 100 people and never anything like a healthcare environment, which is the most unique environment in security, bar none. I think there are applications in security that might translate well to healthcare, but that translate well to the private sector from healthcare. But I don't think the opposite is true. I don't think you can just take something from the private security and just implement it in healthcare in the same way. So it was a real challenge to sort of learn the environment and learn the nuances of operating in that environment that is just really different and sometimes counterintuitive to what a security person would think. But Bellevue Hospital, for those who don't know, it's a dynamic place in New York City. It's the only level 1 trauma center in Southern Manhattan. It's a mecca for most of the disastrous things that happen in New York. And so it was a baptism by fire. And, I learned a lot in the 8+ years I was there, which really, really enhanced my knowledge in the healthcare security world. And then at some point, much like Bob, it was actually after Hurricane Sandy, I realized that if I was going to elevate my game, so to speak, in this industry, I really needed to network because, and to be honest with you, prior to that, I was somewhat intimidated by networking in the healthcare security world because I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. After Hurricane Sandy, I realized I have to get out there and network and try and share knowledge with people who may have had different experiences, because there were things that I had faced that, were just unique, and I felt I needed to educate myself. So that's when I got involved in the MHSDA, and that's when I met Bob. I didn't know him before that, and we sort of, had similar backgrounds, hit it off, and were like-minded in what we wanted the MHSDA to become. And it's been a growing since then, and I think we've created some good stuff and have grown the organization since we've both been there. Bob stepped down in January of last year, and I am the current president. We hope to continue growing the organization, and we're having fun doing it. We do a lot of, content-driven presentations and things. We just finished up a webinar today on cybersecurity. So, it's been fun. It's been good.
Awesome. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to take the opportunity to, I guess, kind of tell people a little bit more about the MHSDA and exactly what it is, kind of how it started, and I guess the affiliation over the years with IHSS as well.
Okay, well, I'll take a little bit of that, and I can tell you that MHSDA was chartered way back when, and I think the charter is actually precedes that of IHOS. And most of the individuals, in fact, I can tell you all of the individuals who originally had the foresight to create the organization are no longer with the association, but they did a great job of sort of passing the torch, so to speak. At times, MHSDA and IHOS were, in fact, in lockstep. We were chapter. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be in the future, but that's something, I think works well for us because we all have the same mission. MHSDA, when I first got introduced to it, and in fact, I'd have to say that he being Ryan LaFleur, was a gentleman I met in New York. I had somebody, a woman that worked in risk management at my hospital, who kept encouraging me because she knew I was on the ledge. I was having a tough time making the transition. And she said to me, why don't you get off your rear end, take some time away from here and go in and meet people that have the same problems, same issues you have. And maybe you could, take a liking to healthcare security, because quite honestly, in the beginning, I didn't think it was for me. Again, I was probably my own worst enemy. I had a tough time slowing down and like Joe said, sort of adjusting to the nuances of what healthcare security is. So I met Ryan. I went into the city and I sat down. It was Ryan, I guess Ben Scaglione was there at the time, a few other individuals. And I went to an MHSDA meeting, and I felt I was actually taking some things away. And I went a second time. And I think the best part of it for me, and maybe because this is what I did so well when I was on the police department, was sort of wind down after the day. And after the day, that meant we would go down, we'd sit down in a restaurant or at the bar specifically, have a couple of beers, and kind of discuss those sort of common problems, those common challenges that we all had. And I realized there were some good guys, and I say Ryan in particular, because it kept me coming back. And at some point, I felt I had something after I had been in healthcare for a while, that I actually had something that I could give and pass on to the next guy. Because I saw other individuals come in, including Joe, with that same deer in the headlights look. You know, this is something completely different than anything I've ever done before. You know, in the police department, for example. And again, this is a different transition, and you know, as opposed to some other people who came up through the ranks of security. We just had a different way of doing things. In the police department, you got X amount of chances. And after the third chance, you would probably end up in handcuffs because you had to move on to the next job, right? There was always another problem you had to get to. You know, what it took me a while to learn in healthcare security was, this is your problem, and you're going to be dealing with it. So there were things I learned after spending 20 plus years in healthcare. I was not prepared to see how well schooled my own staff was and how impressed I was with them over time, because they didn't have necessarily the same tools that folks in law enforcement had. And the best tool they had was their mouth, right? And their voice. And I was very impressed with the way that they were able to de-escalate situations, whether it would be in our psych unit. We had quite a few prisoners. We had quite a few individuals with different substance issues. It was in a fairly gritty area in Brooklyn, level 1 trauma. So these guys were very, very well equipped and very skilled in what they did. So I was smart enough to actually say, well, I may be coaching these people and maybe leading these people, but there's a lot for me to learn here. And once I did that and sort of took that approach and then continued to network with peers, I felt more confident in what I was doing. That's kind of how MHSDA, sort of how I broke in and how I became more involved and how I ended up at some point being looped into being the president. And I still think I got tricked into that, but it's worked out for me, and I've been able to get out from under it now and pass the torch on to somebody else.
Well, and when I first joined MHSDA, I was quickly ushered into the vice president spot, which I still believe is the perfect spot for me. And I would tell Bob, only if he dies do I take over the president. That's how it works. But because of, again, I had this, similar to Bob, I went into this environment. Unlike him, I had a different pathway to getting to Bellevue. And when I first started out in the police department, I was in the subways, where you do a lot of work alone, and you're surrounded by a lot, people, and you have to kind of, at that time the radios didn't work and stuff, so you had to learn how to kind of interact with people and by yourself in sometimes not so happy crowd. So when I got to Bellevue, we had a lot of those same issues, and I just sat back and watched. I spent a lot of time in the emergency room, a lot of time in the psych emergency room, and would just observe, and I would join in helping them. When I say them, I'm talking about my staff, my officers, in managing the situations. But most of the time, I just watched them, and I was in awe of how well they were at de-escalating situations and handling really, really complicated situations and patients. Bellevue has the largest psych population in the city and a psych emergency room. So, complicated stuff, and it's the stuff that most people in law enforcement don't want anything to do with, because you're talking about mental illness and just real challenges. And at the end of the day, what I learned quickly is no matter what, there are patients, and there's nothing we can do about that. They're not going anywhere. There are patients. We have to deal with it. So there is no lifeline for that. You, as a security person, you're the final line of defense for the staff. And I even had at some point in my tenure there, the head doctor, the head psychiatrist stopped me one day, and she asked me, she's like, look, I'm having trouble training my people. How come your people are so good at de-escalating situations with psych patients, and my trained behavioral health people aren't as good as yours? And there seems to be a disconnect. And I said, well, the biggest reason is my people have no choice. There's nobody for them to call. You're calling us. Who are we going to call? We can't call anybody else. We have to learn how to deal with it. So that was eye-opening for me, and ultimately ended up starting my own police academy for hospital police at Bellevue for the entire city. So that was a real eye-opening experience. But when I went through Hurricane Sandy, I realized there was a lot for me to learn from my colleagues in the field, and that's when I started going to the MHSD meetings. I eventually became vice president, and we sort of set the mandate that we wanted to elevate the position of security director, which was a common problem we all had. Us driving our mission and our plans for improving things to get recognized by the C-suite. And that was the biggest challenge. So one of the things we wanted to do was elevate our position in the eyes of the CEOs in the metropolitan New York City area, so that we would have a seat at the table, be able to affect change, get the resources we need. I'd like to think we had a direct impact on that. There are positions around the city in the various systems that didn't exist at that time, and now there are vice presidents of security that cover systems. Right next door to us right now, New York Presbyterian Hospital. They used to report to the director, I think it was of materials management or something, whatever his title was. Now they have a designated vice president of security, covers all their facilities, and all the directors report directly to that person. And all of our larger systems are heading in that direction. And I have no problem with Bob and I taking credit for that.
Awesome stuff. Now, there's so many things that you mentioned that I would love to do a deeper dive on, but the one thing specifically, and I'm going to ask the reason why I'm going to bring up this question is because I've had a lot of people reaching out to me lately who are currently serving police officers who are either retiring soon, and they're looking at that next thing. I guess from the standpoint of transitioning from policing to healthcare security specifically, what were some of the skills that you brought over that were very beneficial? And also, what were some of the things that you had to kind of really adapt to beyond the pieces that you've mentioned already?
What I would say is what I think, and this is not a knock against police officers who are out there, doing that work every day where they're communicating with people, solving problems. Really, it's and I say this often to my people, is it says protect and serve, but we often forget about the serve part. And that's really what they need to focus on. And I think coming from a detective's background, I had a much easier transition because in my job, we were problem solvers, and we just were trying to, and you had to communicate with people. Let's put it this way. I had to convince people to tell me something that would ultimately put them away for the rest of their life. So you had to be able to communicate well with people and not manipulating them, but being able to navigate the environment that you're in, both A, manage down to your people, B, manage up to the executives, and C, be able to lead by example in your interactions with those patients. And they are the most, challenging interactions you will ever have in your life, with dealing with a psychiatric patient or somebody in the emergency room who's just lost their child, or somebody who's in pain. A lot of complicated situations that are constantly coming at you. And if you don't have that skill set, it's not the job for you.
Yeah, agree. I had the same thoughts. If you were, and I hate to keep going back to this terminology, if you were an active guy in a busy time on the police department, you had to learn how to speak to people, or you just weren't going to get things done. And Joe made a great point. When you're doing investigative work, if you don't develop a rapport with people, and I just had this conversation with somebody last week in a presentation. Respect and rapport is very similar, right? It's a two-way street, and it is a very difficult thing when you're discussing something, a horrible crime with somebody. Somebody just beheaded their mother. I'm just using that as a crazy example, and you have to come in and be able to buy that person a sandwich and get them a Coke and sit them down and make them comfortable, right? You got to build a rapport and get them to want to talk to you. So that is a trait or a learned trait or a skill that when you come into healthcare will serve you well. for me coming into healthcare, I think the other thing that was both, it was a double-edged sword because I had been a leader, I guess. I had been a manager, a leader. I headed up a couple of high-profile units in the NYPD for about 12 years. So I had a little bit of the leadership skills under my belt. Granted, there were some tough times I went through with becoming a cop and then moving on and becoming a supervisor. That's a tough field to do that. A paramilitary organization. On the same token, it'd be easy when you had to discipline somebody because it was a paramilitary organization. So, you can put somebody on a foot post when it's freezing cold. You can make them sit on a horrible DOA situation. There were ways to deliver that message, that got through to people, to get them to understand that whatever they were doing, was not the right way to go about it. So you had to learn those little subtleties when you went into healthcare because you're in a very, it's a little bit, certainly a lot more politically correct. It definitely, there's nothing, I don't care if you spent your time as a security guard and you went to school and you worked your way up to be a security director. We all kind of have those moments in our life, those times where we stumble, and you have to learn by it. If you don't learn from your mistakes, you're never going to get better at what you do. So luckily for me, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I like to think I learned from most of them. And
I think the jury's still out on that, but the two things that I think people don't realize in getting into this business, especially if you're coming from law enforcement, it's a harder transition. And I understand why organizations might prefer an internal candidate that came up through the ranks because they understand not just the patient-centric side of things, but also the collaborative side of things within the organization. So the first thing is, and those empathic things that help you as a detective may seem manipulative in an interrogation situation, but they're inside of you. There is a genuine part of that because otherwise, no matter what this person did who's sitting across from you, they'll know if you're faking it. There's got to be something in there that's real. And I often would leave a room with somebody who just confessed to me horrific things and think to myself, boy, what went wrong with that guy? He seems so normal, seems so nice, because part of me connected with that person, and the other part, and that's what you need when you're dealing. It has to be patients first. Always has to be patients first. Not that they can do anything, but you have to think what's best for the patient outcome, and that may be discharging a patient from your system because he's affecting all the other patients. So you have to have a boundaries around that. But the other thing is the environment in healthcare is such a collaborative one. You have to understand the needs of all the other departments and be able to be flexible in your program so that you're supporting these other departments in a way that is accomplishing the goal. This is not unique to healthcare probably, but it seems like from my seat you're touching every single aspect of the organization and you're involved with every department and they all have different needs and you got to be a little bit mindful of what they are when you're making decisions.
Oh, absolutely. And again, you bring up so many more good points that could be that we could really do a deeper dive on. And I really like the example that you gave there of empathy. And even when you're talking to somebody, like in the specific example you gave where they've done some horrific crime, you really have to take a moment and think back. Like this was, well, I'll use another example. I was watching a documentary recently and I saw a baby picture of Hitler in this documentary, right? So you think even at one time he was this little baby, but somewhere along the line, something, or more accurately, a number of things went wrong to lead to, the outcome that people know now. Yeah, the empathic approach is a very important piece.
Agreed.
And I think I'll kind of dovetail that and talk about things going wrong. The thing that you mentioned earlier on was Hurricane Sandy. And specifically, you were working in a healthcare facility at this time. Now, Hurricane Sandy had some significant impacts. It did about $70 billion worth of damage, took 233 lives across 8 different countries. What was the impact on your facility and your community?
Well, the most important impact from my perspective was the car I had just bought that floated to the top of the underground garage I parked it in, right next to Bellevue Hospital. But I don't really want to bring that up. I get a little choked up when I think about it because I really like that car. But you know, it's one of those things that I've done a few times where going through the motions, preparing for this event, we had, and Bob may have a similar kind of feeling about this. The year before we had Hurricane Irene, and there was a lot of preparation, similar buildup. You know, I was impacted more at home than I was in the city, didn't really get so much. So when the following year we had to build up to Sandy, it was like, yeah, okay, here we go again. You know, we've had a lot of these storm-related preparation things, and so just psychologically for me, we did everything the same, but psychologically I had no buy-in to this like catastrophe until we lost power and we started flooding the basement. So, you know, there was, I think I'd like to think many of the people sitting in the command center had that a little bit of the like, this is really happening. I mean, they didn't express that. It was, you know, they're used to dealing with, in that place, they're used to dealing with crisis. So they, you know, they went into action and we had backup power, but then we lost, and we had taken preparations from the year before. We built submarine rooms to protect the pumps and all these things, but the wiring wasn't in there. The wiring outside the submarine rooms was compromised, and ultimately the generator stopped pumping fuel to the pump stopped pumping fuel to the generators, which were all on the 13th floor. And so that was it. And then we lost power, and you know, we had people on ventilators. We had people who just had surgery. One person in particular had heart surgery and was on a device that was plugged in, and you know, was not going to last beyond the emergency power. So once the fuel ran out, that guy was going to die. We had a lot of people on ventilators, but we had been through a power loss a year before, unrelated to weather, where we had to reroute emergency power to and have to go through an exercise where we had to hand vent people and bring in canisters, and other hospitals send canisters to us, including the hospital I'm at now, HSS. But so we had gone through a little piece of each of the problems we were having. It just all collapsed on us at once, and we were a half hour away from losing power. And you know, it's funny how ideas were being thrown around, and the faces in the room were pretty defeated, man, because we were a half hour away from the fuel running out in our generators, and that was it, man. So this one of the people in the room who had been there a week, and he had grown up in kind of a third world country, and he was an IT guy, and he's like, listen, why don't we just if we get the fuel here, why don't, you know, in a truck, why don't we just put it in buckets and we'll bring it up to the 13th floor and we'll dump it into the thing. And it was kind of like, you know, an aha moment, like, yeah, I guess we can do that, you know. So we started a bucket brigade of 5-gallon. At first it was 5-gallon buckets, or any container we could find, and everybody from doctors to you know, clerical staff was chaining up the stairways, 13 floors, and dumping it in. And then eventually we got better containers. The National Guard came the next morning and took over, and that we sustained that for a week of bucket brigade, you know, emergency power. So, you know, you never know where the inspiration is going to come from, and every voice matters, you know, in a crisis. You should, you know, it's just an interesting example of you know, something that somebody who might have been pushed to the side. He's only been here a week. What does he know? You know, but it was, you know, something he was able to think outside the box, whether it was his background, where he grew up, or, you know, him just being there a week, and it really saved lives.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge impact. That's an impactful moment. And it goes back to something that you said earlier too, basically, where you were saying you took the opportunity to learn from the people that were working for you. You know, I can't remember who this quote is. Maybe it was Ralph Waldo Emerson, but
It was probably me.
It's probably you. but
maybe Bob. It might have been Bob.
When you're skating on thin ice. That's right. Emerson.
That's right.
Yeah, it's my favorite Emerson
I'm
quote.
sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to cut you off.
No, hey, it's all good. No, I'm enjoying it. But basically the quote was, every man is my superior in something along those lines. So
Right.
yeah, like you said, the inspiration can come from anywhere, and that's just an amazing story. You know, especially when you share the piece that everybody was involved. You had doctors as part of this brigade carrying these buckets of fuel up. That's amazing, and I'm sure again, and all of that, everything that's going on, this this significant, impactful event, you're really building relationships during that time too. So I'm sure there's people that you were working with there that even though you don't work with them now, you probably still talk to this day.
Yeah, and when we see each other, we kind of nod and smile, and the police department's like that too. And any kind of significant event you're involved in that for those who weren't there wouldn't understand. When you see these people, you kind of look and smile, and you're both back at the same place, and there's an appreciation there.
Yeah, it's a bond. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, what were some of the other things that happened during that time? And I know this is obviously just the example that you gave. That's an amazing example of people really coming together. But what were some of the other things that came out of the response to Hurricane Sandy?
I think Bob might have more of this that happened, but I had a few people that we had all this stuff going on in the hospital, but I also had people who lost everything at home. I mean, just completely wiped out.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, and that's a perfect example of how if you understand the geography of the region, and you would think now my particular hospital at the time, NYU Brooklyn, is down along the Narrows Bay, which it connects to the East River. Joe is on the other side in Manhattan, and we were 1 block off the water, but we were not in a flood zone. So I remember sitting in the situation room with our people, much like Joe was with his C-suite and emergency management people, and we watched the horror of what was going on, not only on the other side and down the block from us. And I say down the block because a few miles away was Coney Island Hospital, which was how far off the water? It's got to be at least 10 to 15 blocks, more than that.
But it's very low.
But it's low. So we were not in a flood zone. We were 1 block off the water, not in a flood zone. And I think we lost some signage off one of the buildings next door.
From the wind.
From the wind.
Really powerful.
And that was about it. So I woke up the next morning. I said, well, everything's great, So I was more concerned with my family who were in Long Island, and many of the people 2 blocks away from us, down towards the south part of the island, lost everything they owned. So it was a very unusual storm. If you remember, it was a calamity of sort of circumstances that everything came together. The tide, the time, the surge, the wind, everything. Just what could go wrong did go wrong. But from a professional standpoint, we were in good shape. Now, not only Bellevue, NYU, Langone, the flagship in Manhattan, very similar circumstance to Joe, had to be evacuated with help from many of our partners. Coney Island and many hospitals were completely off the grid for a while.
Yeah, so we had staff who were stuck at work, because that's what you do when you work in a hospital, and their homes were destroyed. They didn't get back and save anything. You couldn't get fuel. It was difficult to get. So there was some external things going on. And then there was, for hospital stuff, it was the hospitals like Bob had to take on patients from, we had 750 patients when the storm started, and all those patients evacuated. They had to go somewhere. So NYU had the same thing. Coney Island had the same thing. So there were a number of the hospitals that had to evacuate. There was one in Long Beach, I believe, which might have been a long-term facility, but there were all these hospitals that were impacted that had, then the other hospitals around them had to take their patients on, so that was another burden. And then it was coordinating all of that, and then what are you going to do with the staff? All the people who work in the hospital, are they can continue to work, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, tough situation. You had people who, you had a good quantity of your staff who had no power at home, whose family were home. And if you remember, it was in October, but it was a very chilly October, if I'm correct. And it got cold quickly, naturally, because what could go wrong went wrong. It's Murphy's Law. So it was cold. And for many of us, if for me, for example, I had to travel 40 miles. My commute was 80 miles a day, 40 each way. And I had no power at home for 10 or 12 days. And we had no gas. You couldn't pump gas anywhere. You couldn't get gas anywhere. So that poses a problem, just getting your staff back and forth to work. So Joe said there was some gas trucks into some specific areas that were there just for healthcare workers, just so we can get back and forth to work. So it was a very challenging time.
And the other thing is, everything around the hospital had no power, so there was no heat. It was kind of weird. And then we'd have to, parts of Manhattan had power, so we just had to travel there to get carloads of food and bring it back. But it was difficult.
Oh, absolutely. I can only imagine how difficult that must have been. Now, when everything kind of came to a conclusion, what was the whole process like picking up the pieces? I'm sure it was that was another endeavor in itself.
Well, if I could just make this one point, and I think this is something that I think we got a little better at in healthcare, at least here in the city. And we still kind of get away from it, and it's difficult to sort of reel in the C-suite, right? It's all very high level. It's tough to nail people down for a long period of time when you have emergency management exercises, and it's challenge even to have sometimes to even have a tabletop drill to get people together and understand that this is going to be our role in these type of situations. So Sandy was a little bit of a wake-up call here, because that was one of those tabletops that came to life. It happened to be a flood, but very similarly, we've had other incidents, since then that I think have been wake-up calls in our area, at least. But that, I think, was the only good thing that came out of Sandy. I think there are enough people still in a position of authority here in this area who've been through that, who understand that the improbable can become possible. So I think it got their attention, but every time we move a little further away from that incident, I think perhaps they're not as in tune to these type of situations.
So one of the things that came out of that too was we as a group had been talking about, in healthcare, the emergency management side of things was at that time, my experience, and this doesn't speak for other organizations or even other regions around the country, but my experience at that time, the emergency management wasn't fully baked. It was something they had to do because of the Joint Commission wanted to see, a Hicks protocol, and we're asking about that at that time, and so they assigned it to somebody who may have the least impact on of taking them away from other stuff. Was my opinion. So there was, and when I looked at Sandy, it was evident to me, and from security perspective, I never really understood why emergency management wasn't under security, or at least embedded in security, because they're so tightly connected, and every single thing that's an emergency management preparedness person's responsibility is a security issue, 100%. Not every emergency goes across every department, but for sure security is involved, no matter what. So we looked at it like we wanted to create a tool that would be able to sort of get the emergency management team, the organizational C-suite folks who are going to look at that, and give them sort of like a template on not on paper, but a video on training on how to do that. So and then of course the hurricane was done, and everybody was, we were mitigating things, and it was aftermath, but active shooter was always out there. So we thought, let's do nobody has a video on after the shooter is down. So we created this video. Of course, we had to do the first one, active shooter, but if you look at all the active shooter videos, and I think emergency management, it doesn't really matter the incident. The parts are all the same. You have an event, and how do you manage it, right? So we used active shooter, but the same things could apply to a hurricane or a storm event any other natural disaster or man-made disaster. But I think that was one of the things that's lacking. We would do these tabletops, we would do emergency preparedness training, but it was the same people in the same room, and we would, we all, especially at Bellevue, we met a lot because we had a lot of emergencies. Everybody kind of, not that they got lax, but they was sort of like a shorthand, and I think we were subject to miss a lot of things that we wouldn't normally go for. I'll give you an example. As the hurricane's going on, staff are coming to and from the building because the storm is subsided, so it's not like we're it's miserable. Storm is subsided, but we're still dealing with the emergency. Power's out, it's flooded, basement's still flooded, but people are leaving work and coming to work. And of course, the press is outside because they know we had to evacuate. And they're talking to people on the street who may or may not be employees, who knows? But there are reports in the paper that there are bodies floating in the basement, people died, employees died, and we couldn't, because we wouldn't let them go home. Like just crazy stuff that wasn't true. But they had no mechanism to really stay ahead of those communication things. So that's one of the things that we folded into, what do we need to incorporate into this plan? And that's, how do we get ahead of the media? And I think organizations as a whole do a much better job of that, especially with social media, controlling the narrative. But I think those are things that I looked at the time as lessons that we need to take away and do a better job of. And I think, especially for organizations that aren't used to dealing with emergencies, and even those that are, like I said, Bellevue, we were used to dealing with it, but I think there was certain things that we just didn't have on the radar because we didn't anticipate them. And the communication thing is a good example. That was now we're fighting on another front. It's the press, and it's how are we treating our staff. How could you be so cruel to your staff? All of it wasn't true, but the staff is reading it, they're hearing it, they're seeing it on social media, and now we have a whole nother problem we have to deal with that is only exacerbating the actual problem.
Well, yes, a lot of that becomes because it can never happen to us. Right?
Yeah,
and
that's right.
It can never happen to us. And we just had an incident about 5 blocks from here about a month ago. So it was the freshest type of incident where we had a shooting in a healthcare facility in a hospital very nearby. Yeah, so it can never happen to you until it happens. And I
thought the same thing about Sandy. I was like, yeah, no way. It's Manhattan. What's like a flood? Yeah. And yet we were minutes away from people dying. So. And just one more comment on all of this, and specifically the importance when it comes to being a security director, wherever you are. It doesn't have to be healthcare, but one of the things that I'm proud of is how my staff responded during those events and many others, but especially that particular event. But when you have a crisis, in fact, we did a webinar last year during the COVID, right when the COVID began, and somebody asked me, there's people listening across the country, and we were at the height of it in New York at the time when we were doing it, with the height of COVID here. And they asked, there's somebody in California, a security director, what advice would you have to that person to prepare, to get his staff prepared? And I was like, well, if you're preparing now, it's too late. You need to do that the day you take the job, and have a good relationship with your staff, hold them accountable, but be good to them. And because in situations like Hurricane Sandy, my staff showed up every day. They stayed long hours in miserable conditions. They didn't, they could call in sick, and there's a limit to what you can do with that. But I think that's one of the biggest lessons for me is to make sure that you're building that relationship and being supportive of your staff, so that when you need them, they're there for you.
Absolutely. And that brings me to another point that I know it's been coming up a lot in conversations I've been having now. When you transitioned into the healthcare security world, did your, I guess, policing background or any leadership experience that you had, did it adequately prepare you? I find what a lot of people say is when you end up being a high achiever and you get promoted into various roles, and a lot of times the training's not there to really help you be able to establish yourself as a leader and effectively run a program or lead people. What are kind of your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a good one because you're right. I don't necessarily think I was well prepared, and a lot of that's probably my own fault because maybe I had blinders on, and I probably I think the way things developed for me was that my children were at an age where my current career was simply keeping me away from being home and being more involved in their lives. So that was the priority in my life. The great love of my life outside my wife and my children was my job, and I loved that job. I really did. So when I made the decision to move into healthcare security, um, naturally I thought I was well prepared because I was sort of an individual who I had a certain stature on the police department and I guess a certain amount of autonomy based on where I was to do what I did, and I had a very high performing group of people. These were people who earned their way, and naturally they made me look good because they were so good at what they did. So when you become the guy, right? When you feel like you're the person, you're really the boss within your own unit, and then you move into healthcare security, you learn pretty quickly that there are quite a few layers involved, and it can be very humbling when you first move in. And I think a lot of people, and I'm guessing you've had people on, Brian, that have had this similar type of transition. It can be very humbling to move from a paramilitary organization into something such as healthcare, particularly in a large organization. I was lucky enough to move into a standalone. It was essentially a community hospital. So I was a bull in the china closet a little bit in the beginning, but then we became part of a much larger organization, which is layered with folks. So I don't think anything could have prepared me for that. In that particular instance, I might have been better suited to be like we talk about other people who come up through the chain of command, maybe from a security guard, go to school, get their master's in business administration. I don't care. I have great respect for anybody in this industry because we all do the same thing. But we're different animals and we have to adapt. So yes, like we said before, I had good experience in handling people. I had good people that worked for me, and I had good people that worked for me when I went into healthcare. But it definitely is a tough transition. It does help to have prior supervisory experience, but it's certainly, if you think you're going to walk in, put your feet up on the desk, and do this job, you're in for a wake-up call because it's certainly an eye opener.
I think as much as I could have been prepared for my job, the nature of what we did every day, I was not prepared for. But where my experience did prepare me, especially in New York City, it may be different in other areas, so I can't really speak to that. But the New York City culture and environment, especially in a city hospital, but also in any trauma center. Bob's hospital was trauma center too. You're going to interact with police on a regular basis. So I think that I think that the law enforcement background, immediately there's a respect there from the police department that you have to interact with so often that might not be there if you didn't. And that could be, it's not just law enforcement. It's the fact that I was an NYPD person. So like if you were perhaps from another law enforcement background, you might not get that same rapport because, you sort of, you might get the secret handshake and we all know, we've come from the same background, so to speak. So that's there, but also, and again, going back to being in the detective field, I knew how to navigate situations and relationships, and that's both from internally and externally, because now and this is where I think some former law enforcement people can get themselves into trouble is, you take that job in the hospital, you work for the hospital. Not that you're against the police, but every decision you make has to be in the best interest of the hospital. And that may oftentimes be not what the police want to do, and you have to hold your ground. And I got lucky very early on in my tenure at Bellevue. There was a few situations where the police wanted to impose their will on the hospital, and I stood up to them and, basically told them, no. And I was fortunate that my predecessors never did that. And immediately I gained the respect of the hospital's leadership. And we built a relationship from there. But they'll test you. I know the leadership will test you to see where your loyalties lie. And, it has to be with the people who hired you. Now, that's also a tricky thing, because if the people who hired you or someone in the organization is doing something they're not supposed to do, you have to handle that in whatever way you think is appropriate. And I think that's where having a moral compass on doing the right thing always, I think it is, is paramount to no matter where you work. So it could be tricky, but I think especially in a hospital environment, it's complicated, a lot of things going on. But I think that's where, the interaction with law enforcement is where my background benefited me, where others might not get that benefit of the doubt. Also, knowledge of the law, really, really important. Your CEO doesn't know it, your COO doesn't know it, your legal team doesn't know it.
I think they know it.
Your risk management folks don't know it. Nobody knows it like you if you have that background, and not just what the law is, what you can, what you're able to charge somebody with, but what cases are viable in the DA's office and which aren't, how to put a case together, how to collect evidence. All those things really helped me especially when I didn't know anything else about healthcare security. I was able to lean on those things to make me at least look like half of what I was doing.
No, definitely a good idea to leverage the skills that you already have. Now, we've covered a lot of topics here. We've went pretty, we've covered things on a really broad level, but it's been some really good information. Now, is there anything I didn't ask either of you that you'd like to discuss now?
I think we've given you enough for today. No, I mean, well, I would say this. Our goal moving forward is always putting on good programs, having good conversations like this one today. We enjoy it. We like to, we're never shy about talking about what we do and how we do it, and how we want to grow not just our organization, but the role of the security director in healthcare. And because I think it is the most under-evaluated position in organizations, and my mission is to change that. And I had somebody, if you can find somebody to give me a staffing model for security, that guy should get a Pulitzer Prize, because it's really, or girl, it's really one of the things that is elusive, and I've been working on since I got in this industry. But I'm working with we have these operational excellence folks who can make algorithms and think all those things. Anyway, they're working on something to try and right size my staff, and their only comment to me was, is there anything the security department doesn't do? Because the reality is, if you're in this world in healthcare, man, you're doing it all, and you're the go-to because you're here all the time, 24 hours a day. They dump everything on you, and I have a bad habit of never saying no. Always looking like with an eye on how can it benefit my department, but you want to be cooperative and collaborative, but sometimes that can become a burden. Anyway, so we're always trying to create content. We have something coming up in March, so we have something scheduled for the 11th.
Yeah,
and it's going to be a active shooter.
It's really gonna dive into some threat assessment stuff that I think would benefit everybody. And our main speaker is fabulous. She's a former FBI special agent who headed up some pretty prestigious units, not only here in this area, but nationally. She's very well respected. And so I know that she's going to be great we're going to get into a little bit of what went on some of the most recent shooting incidents, but really going to dive into the threat assessment piece, which I think that many of us don't really have a great handle on, and we all have 6, 7, 8, and I say we all, anybody who is in this line of work, who works in healthcare security, there's always those 7, 8 names that as soon as you hear them, you go, oh my goodness, what did he do now, right? You know, some patient, some prior visitor, and 1 or 2 of them, you always have the hair stands up on the back of your neck because you worry about that individual. But not everybody is that adept, and I think we have to realize that, you know, we have to be able to reach out to people who may know more than we do, and she's one of those folks, our speaker, Barbara Daly. So I think it's going to be an eye opener, and I think it'd be worth tuning in.
And I think that's an area of we often get asked, what do we get, and not just by my organization, but we get asked by a lot of different folks, other security directors, other organizations, what's the best way to combat active shooter or to address it? Everybody wants metal detectors and all those things, and not that I don't want to say I'm against metal detectors, I am, but that's not the point. I just think for what they do to your environment, it's I understand the utility of them, but the reality is I would rather take those resources and put them into threat assessment and threat management, because my belief, and we're very aggressive when we get somebody who blips on the radar in the threatening way, whether it's an employee or a patient or somebody else. We attack that as much as we can, as far as digging into their background, engaging with law enforcement, looking into who this person is, alerting my staff, and making sure that we're doing these laser beam approach rather than casting a wide net, hoping we catch somebody who thinks that they're going to come in first and then shoot, as opposed to standing on the other side of the metal detector and shooting people, whatever. But I think that's Barbara's going to talk about some of that stuff, and I really do think that. And then the problem with it too is the healthcare especially is under-equipped to deal with that. They just don't have the resources. They don't have the tentacles don't reach that far, and it's hard to sell to the C-suite folks that we need extra tools to help us protect the place in that way. Because, like Bob said, especially I think now more than ever, healthcare is a magnet for criticism, because everybody is afraid of an illness, and we have to give them vaccines, or they hate vaccines, or whatever their issue is. But healthcare is on the radar, and I think that just creates more animosity, and it's going to create more potential threats, and it's the organizations need those tools to be able to give themselves as much ammunition as they can to protect themselves.
Absolutely. Now I want to ask kind of you made me think of something else there now. So Bob, I'm just curious for you, what was more difficult, investigating homicides or going to the C-suite and asking for money?
I think you hit it right there. It's easily number 2. Investigating homicides is a learned sort of skill or trait. And again, I had the best people on the planet, New York City homicide detectives, so they made me look good. When you get into,
plus the guy's already dead.
Right, the guy's dead. So what is he going to say? How's he going to complain? But no, my point is, the other thing is it's very difficult, and I've seen some great guys and girls in this industry who have laid out strategies, so to speak, how to go into the C-suite and make a case to spend money on security, to invest in security, and sure enough, you have to be able to, you got to be able to, take advantage. If you're opening up 500 doors a day, documenting I'm opening up 500 doors a day, that's a certain labor that's got to be expended, whatever the case may be. I think they tend to look at what security is, and I'm talking about C-suite, is they come in the morning, they come up the escalator, they walk past what they think is a potted plant. They see the security officer there, he's there, and then they go about their business. And at the end of the day, they go home safely, and they don't give it a second thought. We know that there's a lot that goes into what our people do. So it's very difficult to do that. And obviously, you have to be fairly articulate, and you got to be able to go in there guns are blazing. I hate to use that term, but you have to be able to have your documentation as to why you need those things. I can tell you in 11 and a half years, I don't think I was successful once in a capital. So obviously, I'm not the right guy to ask, but I can tell you, you know that it's usually it's a very reactive sort of field we're in. Quite frankly, if you want to get anybody's attention, and just we talked about active shooter, 360 days of the year, it's not on anybody's radar. But if somebody gets it on their Twitter, then whether it be the CEO or somebody else, they want to know what you're doing. What are you doing about it? And
well, I think Bob's point is correct. You really need a strategy beforehand. In advance. Be thoughtful about what you're looking, what you want. Be realistic in what your goal is and what you think you can get away with incrementally. Like if you have a plan, make sure it's incremental so you're stealing money a little at a time as opposed to handing them a big bill. And I think numbers show why you need the resources you need. And I think I'll give you an example. I recently started providing the which also becomes a burden because I've recently given the executive team a intel briefing weekly on what's occurring in the hospital that's of concern, what's occurring in the area that's concerned, what's occurring in the nation and then globally. And the problem is they get that, they read it, they go, oh shit, and now what are you doing about this? Or what do so I'm sort of calling an airstrike on my own position a little bit, but I'm doing this stuff anyway. I'm looking at it anyway. I'm constantly, because I'm threat assessing all the time. So my thought was, well, I'm doing it anyway. I might as well get some credit for it. And maybe that will soften them up in a month or two when I come to them and say, hey, I need this because this is going on. They might be like, yes, you do. So it's different strategies to try and soften them up. So when you're asking for money, they think, wow, that's a bargain. I could probably do that, as opposed to, a grand plan that, that might be really costly and will have them push you away right away.
Yeah, I agree. And it also pays to be, to have those relationships with, your energy folks, with your engineering folks, your facilities folks, because sometimes you can get creative and fold in your security needs into a bigger project, whether it's an energy savings project through the hospital. It's something that I'm doing now. This is my pitch from my current job at Siemens. But we do something similarly now where, I'm able to find savings in the hospital, whether it be a new cogen project or something of that nature, where you can get rebates from the local energy provider and things of that nature. So if you can save 50-60% over 6 years, 7 years, and it equates to X amount of $1 million, there's a way to fold in security projects into those savings. So
well, you could fold them into the project too, whether it's additional cameras and card access and stuff surrounding the infrastructure. We've tried to do that here. And to Bob's point, that's where that integration of services between security and all the other departments, facilities, IT, you're protecting all their stuff, and even the clinical departments. That's where you can get creative and really get some of the things you want accomplished without even having to go to the CEO and ask for money because somebody else is doing it for you.
Absolutely. Now, as we start to wrap up, do you guys have a special message you'd like to share with the Healthcare Security Cast community?
Call Siemens.
No, I wouldn't say call me, but I can tell you, Brian, I have a great amount of respect for you, and maybe I have a social media crush on you because I admire what you've been doing. I think you do great work, and I see what you do on LinkedIn and some of the other social media avenues about getting the message out about what we do. We, not just us here in New York, but globally, even our neighbors to the north. I think what you're doing is great. I appreciate it. I think it's a good thing, and it's nice to see people who are in the same boat that you are. I know we share the same challenges every day. I always like to see what other people have to say and pick some of those things up. And what do they say about that? What's the greatest form of flattery? Is when you see what somebody else is doing and you copy it. Imitation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stealing, we call it.
Can we start from the very beginning?
We call it stealing. Yeah.
We call it stealing.
I thought you were going with
Stealing is an ugly
I
word.
thought
But you
you
take
were going.
something and you use it as your own.
I thought you were going to say
so I do-
high tide raises all ships.
You-
Something like that.
I had a couple of
This isn't a
analogies,
plane we
a couple
want to build while we're
couple
flying.
of things, but I do have a great deal of respect for many of the people you've had on here. I've met them, I know them. Some of them I still have a relationship with. So I'd like to just say thanks, and thanks for having us on.
Well, I don't think I could say it better than that. I mean, I think, as I said, that when Bob and I first met and we thought about what we want for the Metropolitan Healthcare Security Directors Association, the goal was to elevate the position of security director in the eyes of the executive teams in the industry. And I think what you're doing goes way further than we could in that journey. And so I appreciate it as well, because I think it is catching on. You see around the industry the level of talent that has moved into these positions, shows the seriousness that these organizations are taking in the rollout of security programs. So, and again, I have no problem taking credit for that. I know Bob doesn't, but you should take credit for it too.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the kind words, gentlemen. Now, what is the best way for us to connect with you guys, to get in touch with you?
The easiest way, to get in touch with us and the other individuals, particularly on the board in this area, is through the website. You can hit us up at www.admin, correct? MHSDA.admin. I think that's about right.
No, it's admin.
Admin at MHSDA.
MHSDA.
We should probably know this, but it's true.
I just get the emails.
So the easiest thing is that it comes to all of us.
Yeah,
You can always get a hold of us.
It's admin at MHSDA.org.
There we go.
If you folks go to the MHSDA.org website, there's our active shooter videos there, our emergency management video, which is the second part of the active shooter, is there for them. It's they can look at it.
Any of the webinars we've done this year since COVID, we have them, and we have a great partner in Allied Universal that's been working with us. We've been using their platform. So we take that, and all of that we dump it onto the website. So there's some decent content there. We try to make it available to everyone, not just our members, at least through, especially the COVID resources. So I would invite everybody to go on there, and perhaps there's something there they can steal from us.
Appreciate it, guys. I appreciate you guys making the time to do this. I feel like I only really scratched the surface with you. I know we could have probably went deeper with every topic that we discussed, but I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the candor, and thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having us,
All right,
man.
Brian.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Be good.
And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. In advance of the daylight savings time adjustment, we'll be joined by sleep hacker Catherine Nixon, discussing the importance of sleep and sharing some practical tips for shift workers to make the necessary adjustments. The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our Linktree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, BRINE, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.